Welcome to the Good, the Bad, and the Sequel Q&A. My name's Doug. Next week's sequel that we're going to be covering is Fright Night Part 2. I love that movie. I love just doing the review with Jamie. And I loved this week's interview with the actor who played Bosworth, the bug-eating man in the movie. And that's actor Brian Thompson. You know Brian from so many things. Cobra, The Terminator, Joe Dirt, Mortal Kombat Annihilation, and so much more. But I love finding out his story, his journey from the Pacific Northwest to Hollywood. It is just one of those stories that I love to talk about. Him talking about early auditions, his first job, Cobra, and having to go back and back to get to land that role opposite Stallone, and just so much more. Brian was so down to earth. I'm so happy that he took the time to talk to me because I love being able to learn about his journey to Hollywood. So before I start the interview, I just always got to remind you, please subscribe wherever you're listening to. Click the subscribe button and also review, rate, and share our podcast, because the more people that listen, it just makes me feel a little bit warm and fuzzy inside. So without further ado, here is actor Brian Thompson.
Are you there, Doug?
Yeah, Brian, how you doing?
Hey, good. How are you?
Good, man. Thank you so much for taking the time. I love being able to deep dive, obviously not in people's careers, but just the information you can find online. Because me and my wife lived in Portland, Oregon for a few years, well, like 3 years total back and forth. But so you grew up in Washington?
Yeah, and I paid for college doing a job called pile bucking on the Columbia River. So some of those docks and bridges on the Columbia in and around Portland, I hope some of my work survived.
We love the Columbia River. Like growing up in Jersey, going to the shore, we were so not disappointed because the Oregon coast is like so beautiful and so breathtaking. Like the first time we hiked through and we got to the end and you just see the Haystack Rock and everything. But it just wasn't the same not being able to go to the water. But man, I missed the Columbia. We had a good time going there.
It is my favorite place in the world. It's I feel home when I'm on the west side of the Cascades, and then my beautiful partner and I have a place we go hide out on the southern coast.
Nice.
We're about a mile from the ocean, and it's a place called Flores Lake, and it's an internationally known wind sport destination: kite surfing, kite foiling, wing foiling. It's all those sports are in abundance there, as well as are you a golfer at all? The Bandon Dunes Golf Resorts.
Yeah, I actually know a guy that caddies there. My buddy's brother lives out in San Francisco, so he travels up there every so often to go play. I never played there when I was out in Oregon, but do you play?
Yes, and I get to sneak up to the course several times a summer.
That's nice. When did you start kite surfing? Was that something you did on the Columbia?
Did you, by any chance, catch any episodes of Key West?
No, I didn't, but I was going to ask you about that.
Well, there was a beach next to the condo that I lived in when we shot Key West, and there was a sign that said 10 windsurfing lessons, $100. So at the end of those 10 lessons, I bought myself a windsurfing rig, and then windsurfing in about the end of the 90s grew into kiting. And then kiting grew into kite foiling. And then kite foiling grew into wing foiling, which is the fastest growing water sport right now. I'm now a wing foiler. And
what's the difference between that and kite foiling?
Well, you've seen kite surfing, right? Where you have the kites that are on 20 or 30 meter strings in the sky. Basically, it's a kite that you hold on to with no strings. So it's a cross. Yeah, it's a sail and it's a wing. It looks very much like the kites do, but it has a center strut that has several handles on it. So you hold on to it like you would a windsurfing boom.
So you must still have really good upper body strength because that sounds like that'd be pretty intense for that.
Well, you start out small, and as you last, I don't know, half an hour the first time, and then maybe 40 minutes, and then you wait for your body to recover, and then you can last for an hour, and then eventually a couple hours.
Wow. So when you were growing up, you grew up in like outside Longview or in Longview?
In Longview.
Nice. And it's funny, when me and my wife are sitting there and I'm like, because I know a lot of things on IMDb aren't right. So somebody wrote a biography for you. I don't know if it was you or an agent you had at some time. And the city it said you guys were in now or at that time that was written was Kelso.
Yeah, they're border cities. They're both on the Columbia.
No, me and my wife have a funny story about that because when we first moved out to Oregon, I guess it was like 2014 when they first legalized marijuana in Washington. And it was like, it would run out. Me and my wife were like, hey, this seems pretty cool. So then it was like sold out all in Vancouver. So the only place my wife called around was in Kelso. So that's like a running joke still to this day.
Where they still had marijuana?
Yeah, it was like the closest place because it wasn't legal in Oregon yet. So I always joked that with my wife. I'm like, man, that we drove, I don't even know how far it was. It must have been over an hour. I'm like, just to go to this little shack, and then they had like nothing. But when I saw that, and then I got a little nostalgic, I can't lie, because Winco was my favorite supermarket.
That's funny.
The little things you miss, you know?
So I think you've been shopping in Longview, Kelso more recently than I have.
Well, yeah, maybe.
Yeah. Sounds like it.
Yeah. So when did you start? What was your first like passion? So like growing up, obviously you started acting. It was senior year was the first time.
Yes. And it was, you find we find some of our interests by happenstance. We heard that I ended up being a windsurfer by the location in Key West.
Yeah.
I had a good friend, Paul Delashaw, who I often gave him a ride home because his house was on the way home to my house. And I asked him if he wanted to ride home from school one day. And he said, no, I'm trying out for the school play. Well, Brian, there's a part you'd be great for. Oh, Paul, come on. I don't want to. Yeah. It's just that the reluctant, Brian, I really think you should do it. There's this part of this Russian ballet instructor, and you got the Russian thing going. And, minutes later, I found myself in the school cafeteria, and I did get this part that Paul told me I would be good for is this Russian ballet instructor in the classic comedy, You Can't Take It With You. It's a Kaufman and Hart comedy.
Was this during the fall or spring? Like, were you doing football?
Spring, because I played football in the fall. Yeah. I swam in the spring. I swam in the winter, and then in the springs I would go fishing. Because my dad had an aluminum drift boat that he'd let me take fishing, and our friends and we might share a little bit of the herb as we drifted down the river and try to catch a steelhead or salmon, which nice. We did. We caught them quite frequently. But anyway, so that play, I had the time of my life. I mean, I really loved playing football. That's a whole different, sport, just the cataclysmic explosion of, launching yourself off the line. That's a whole different high. But the visceral enjoyment, the ecstasy that I experienced doing this play, part of that was brought on by coincidentally 3 girls that completely rotated my head in high school were in the play. I mean, 3 girls that I would have loved to have been closer to. I didn't get very close. Didn't get close to any of them. A great shout out to Nancy Johnson, Julie LaFaw, and Marcia Jacobson. We were all in this play together, and I was near these beautiful, fresh creatures for several hours during rehearsal and then in the play. And the play was very successful, and it completely captured my imagination. I didn't stop thinking about it, and I went to Central Washington University to play football. And so I played football. And then first day of winter quarter, there was a play notice for Guys and Dolls, a musical. And I really haven't spent much time not acting since.
Wow.
I was a music major at the time. I had a piano scholarship, and my father was freaked out about what are you going to do with a music major? So even though I was paying for my own school, I listened to my parents. I don't know if that's a good idea or not, but I got a degree in business management. It was painful. Oh gosh. Economics and accounting, it just hurt my brain. But it was an act of discipline. It was sort of, accounting to me is sort of like solitary confinement. You're by yourself, forcing yourself to do something that you just don't even want to be doing. So I did plays as much as I could through college. I was never a drama major. I took a couple, I got one acting class because you could take it as a breadth requirement. So I did have one beginning acting class, but I was always in the plays. I had plays and scripts falling out of my backpack. It was because I would read a play, or if I heard a monologue that I really liked, it wouldn't leave me alone until I had memorized it.
Wow.
And so then I started reading Shakespeare, and then I started memorizing Shakespeare monologues. And this was all on my own. Sort of like, you hear about guys that learn about computer coding when they're young, and they just dive into it and they become these computer wizards. I was completely addicted to acting and theater. I would be in a strange town, and I'd walk by a theater and I'd start to vibrate like a tuning fork with the thought, they do plays in there. They do plays in there. And back to the Columbia River story, working out of Portland, Coast Marine Construction. I don't even know if they're still around, but they had offered me a job when I got out of school in 1980. It was this fall of 1980. They said, Brian, we get out. You can come work for us and in a supervisory capacity at a really good starting salary at $50,000. And I thought about it. And speaking of visceral reactions, I was walking across campus in the fall, and they were breaking out some concrete with a sledgehammer and a jackhammer, sorry, the air powered jackhammer. And it hit me in the stomach, the vibration, and it made me nauseous. And I got back to my dorm room, and I was sweating and I was nervous, and I'm like, why? What the hell's going on? And the voice in your head says, you don't want to take that job. What do you want to do? Oh, you know what you want to do, Brian. You want to be an actor. Yeah, I want to be. Shit. How are you going to be an actor? How can you make a living acting? You can't make a living acting. No, not in Ellensburg, Washington. Well, maybe you can get into an acting school. Maybe I could find school. So I went to the library and I found this book called Acting Professionally by Dr. Robert Cohen. They had it in the Ellensburg Central Washington University Library, and it had addresses of professional actor training programs that were university accredited. And you could write to them and get their, application procedures. And so I did. I wrote, and I didn't tell anybody because I didn't want. If you're in Ellensburg, Washington, you tell people you're going to be a professional actor, they're going to laugh at you. They're going to yeah, good luck with that. Well, I sent off these letters, and one of the things that they wanted was a letter of recommendation from like one of your directors or somebody at this. So I had to tell the drama professors that I was going to audition for these programs. And what happened was what I feared. They tried to talk me out of it.
Oh, really? What?
Absolutely. They said, well, they gave me stories of, Brian, I tried it for a little while, and, there aren't any jobs, and you'd be very happy in a community theater. I remember that sentence specifically.
Oh,
you can have a lot of fun doing community theater. And anyway, I got, I auditioned for the University of California Irvine Master of Fine Arts program, and they basically gave me a full ride to their master's program. So I got to leave Washington State, and I knew I would have enough money to pay for school. They gave me a teaching fellowship, a tuition waiver, and so it was just enough money that you could survive. That's what a lot of grad students do. I can survive on this. And so I went to the University of California, Irvine, where all we did was act, sang, and dance 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. And people would say to me, "Oh, nice work, Brian, nice work." And it was confusing to me because it was the funnest thing. This isn't work. Building docks and bridges is work. Standing on a floating raft of creosoted logs running a chainsaw, that's work. This isn't work. Anyway, while I was in school, the one thing that the business management degree helped was, you look at, you always heard, acting is a business, and what are the barriers to the market, and what product you have to sell in the market. And the barriers to entry to me was surviving the audition. I wanted it so much. There was this dragon of nerves that lived inside you. And I knew that even at college, that my best auditions were left at home, because nerves will steal your focus, fear, self-doubt. And I said, well, how are you going to get better at auditioning? Oh, do more auditions. So there was a paper called the Drama Log, and they would advertise open calls at the studios or auditions for equity waivered plays, musicals, summer stock, all those, the regional theaters had auditions in there sometimes. So any chance that I could, I admit I skipped class sometimes to go to auditions because I felt it would be important. I started auditioning in Hollywood halfway through my second year. It was a 3-year program at Irvine. And crazy thing happened. I started being offered the jobs.
Like, what are some of the early auditions, maybe when you still had the butterflies? Do you remember was it like commercial work you were going for first, or?
I did not have any commercial auditions. It was, it was scripted parts where you had to come up with dialogue. And I remember standing in one of those lines on a sidewalk for an equity waivered play I think it was on Melrose. And there was a guy standing in line with me. I'm still in college, and he's like, you'd be a really good heavy. I'm like, what's a heavy? I didn't even know what that term meant. What's a heavy? He goes, the guy that, the guy that the good guys have to fight, the bad guy, the guy that fucks people up. And I was kind of insulted by that. It's like, so out of the mouths of strangers. I remember one of the auditions, I stood in line for 3 hours to get into Warner Brothers. They were having an open call for Lady Hawk.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. And so obviously, they gave the part to somebody else, but I think his name was Rutger Hauer. But I at least got in the door. And so that was school. And I had auditioned for a really great summer theater program that year at the PCPA in Solvang, Santa Maria, has one of the most highly touted summer theater programs in America.
Oh yeah, Brian, you wouldn't believe how many times I've heard that. I've interviewed Troy Evans and Gregory Scott Cummings. They
Yeah.
all went through there, and Troy, from there, he built so many relationships that later in his career he just worked because Julia Louise Dreyfus's husband was there. So he was able to get on VP years later. They were like, "Oh, Troy's from Montana." They were casting for like a Montana senator, so they just called him up. And it's so funny that I've heard that so much in like the last five months hearing about
Well,
that.
my story is not going to echo having made connections there because I was going to PCPA. I had a job for the summer there, and they were doing a little night music. And at the time, I lived and breathed Stephen Sondheim. I mean, I was like, I could sing 20 Sondheim songs at an audition from memory. Stephen Sondheim, I still marvel at how he's married lyric, melody, and emotion. I mean, no one has done it like he has time after time and time. Anyway, so I had this job there, but about 3 weeks before I was supposed to go to PCPA, I got hired. I went to an open call at Universal Studios for the Conan show for the tour. They had this Conan live tour. And I had gotten, this was a big job too. They had auditioned over 3,000 people.
Wow. And
I was one of 5 casts. They cast 5 casts, and they ranked us every week like we were on a football team. There was they gave us names like Hyborian, Aquilonians, Sumerians. I'm forgetting what the 4th one was, but the Nomads, the 5th cast, the 5th team, we were called the Nomads. We didn't have a home. And I was the Nomad. I was the Nomad Taurus Mordor. And so they were only paying like, I don't know, $50 a day for rehearsals, which was more money than I'd ever made. So I was pretty happy anyway. But this job was supposed to go on through the summer. And the day before I was supposed to go to PCPA, I went and saw a production of Richard III with at South Coast Repertory Theater in Orange County. And one of my instructors who had taught our comedy class, Ron Bowsam, I think he played Puck in Richard III. After the play was over, we went and visited him backstage, and it's very, very dramatic. He's in the room with half a dozen other actors, and there's the makeup lights, and he's taking off the makeup. He's got the heavy eyeshadow, and it's coming off in big black smears. And I told Ron my dilemma. I said, I've got this job at Universal Studios, but I'm the 5th cast member, but I'm supposed to be at PCPA tomorrow. And I love Stephen Sondheim. And he's like, Brian, what do you want to do? He said, do you want to be like me, 40 years old, with roommates, wondering if you and your wife can afford to have kids? Do you want to try that Hollywood thing? Or do you want to, you try to get in a regional theater? And I hadn't asked myself that question. Did I want to try to get into movies and TV? I hadn't asked the question. It hadn't really been on my mind. I had been to some open calls for some stuff, but it was totally foreign to me. It wasn't anything I knew. And so I went home that night, and I just thought about it, and I'm like, had I not have seen Ron that night sharing with me his vulnerability and disappointment of being 40 years old and being an actor, a very successful actor in a regional theater, and looking in his eyes and showing me the fear and sort of the loneliness of not really being able to live the lifestyle that he wanted, I don't know that I would have, if I would have done it.
Wow.
But as I started to think about, they say go towards the light, or you think about where the energy is. I started thinking, well, I do want to try it. I do want to try this to see if I can act in TV. So I called up PCPA the next day. Donovan Marley. Oh shoot, I'm not really remembering the name.
That sounds right. Marley, you said?
And
yeah,
I think that was. And I called. I didn't get to speak with him directly. I talked to his assistant. I said, "Hey, this is Brian. I'm not coming." What? I'm sorry. I've got this other job, and I'm going to try it. And it's torn me, but I'm not coming. What? Somebody's not coming. I'm sorry. I really apologize. And but funny, like the next week, the show was opening up at Universal Studios, and one of the guys there was one kind of small dicey part that this actor had to do in the show at Universal Studios, which is you had to fall headfirst 18 feet through a ring of fire. It's not really that big a deal, but no, it's scary as shit, believe me. and one of the guys in front of me broke out in hives because he just was so scared about it that he couldn't do it. And one of the next guys in front of me blew his knee out. And so they had 3 casts that could do the job all summer. So now I had the job the whole summer. And I was in Hollywood, and I sent out, I had a friend with a word processor, and we sent out 37 letters to agents. And not to go into that whole story, but I got 7 interviews from the 37 letters, or actually I think it might have been 9. But I met with all 9 agents, and I got with a really great agency. And by the time I left college that year, I had 5 SAG jobs.
Wow.
And I had made the exact sum of money that I had been offered at the construction job in Portland. I went from living on student loans to my last year in college in 1984. I made $50,000.
Wow. Oh my gosh. Did you ever tell your dad that you got that job offer in Portland, or did you try to keep that from him?
Wow. I don't distinctly remember that I had told him that.
If you did tell him, he might have like hogtied you and made you like go to Portland and not go down to California.
Yeah. No, they, the generation back then. My dad was very close to the vest with his emotions. Like his biggest compliment that he ever told me about acting after the movies came out was, this is the compliment right here. You ready?
Yeah.
Yeah, we saw it. You've just heard it.
That's great. And you were probably so excited. If somebody else heard that, like on speakerphone, or they were within earshot, they probably like, oh man, that's rough. You're like, oh my God, he saw it.
Exactly. At least they went. Yeah. Because I don't know if this is true, but I just haven't Googled it. But to this day, I think I'm the only professional actor that has come out of Longview, Washington. And people don't understand the scarcity of jobs, and that the attrition rate is similar to the NFL.
Oh yeah.
You got like 100,000 people playing college football, and a couple thousand and some change make a living doing it.
No, I interviewed this guy that was on this actor, Kevin Kilner. He was on the board of SAG. Like, I don't know if he was a few years ago when I talked to him, or he did in the past, but when he told me the number of like people that are working that can live off of it, I was like, wow, when you really think about it, it makes sense. But in the same, you're just like, man, there's so many TV, there's so many movies, but there's only that many people, I guess, obviously making enough to make it. But you're right. It is like the perfect comparison, like that funnel from college to the NFL. Like how many people don't make it.
The thing I hate hearing the most is, oh, you would have been really good in, fill in, the X-Men. You'd be great in Game of Thrones. I'm like, how, how come you're not in X? And I said, well, hey, I think so too. Get me an audition. And they look at, their eyes kind of glaze over like, well, how are you going to get an audition? My agent can't get me an audition. Most of these parts, they don't even have auditions for the big A-list projects. I talk to MFA students now and then, and I throw this question out at them. I say, hey, in my career, my 30-some year career, how many times have I got to audition for a movie that was nominated for an Oscar? Okay, not one, just nominated. Okay, other than special effects. I throw that caveat out there. How many movies? And people were like, oh, maybe one a year, maybe a handful. No, goose egg, 0.
Wow.
I never even got to read the script. You don't get it's just so competitive. However,
are you teaching right now?
No, I was offered full-time teaching positions a decade ago, and I thought about it. And because University of California, Irvine had the television film acting position opened, and I'm like, oh man, because I love college campuses. Oh my God, talk about being sequestered in a beautiful environment with those fresh freshmen walking around. Like I think like the head of our department married 2 of his students.
2?
Yeah. It was so bad back then. They absolutely, that's all gone by the wayside due to lawsuits, which were good. But if you were in the faculty and you weren't like playing with your students, you kind of were like, oh, what's wrong with you? It was just kind of socially accepted. Oh yeah, that's so-and-so's girlfriend. Anyway, there was a point to this.
No, about you getting offered a job about a decade ago.
Well, last year's work, because we're in 2021. Quite potentially, I'm now going to be able to say 1 because of the Macbeth. Joel Cohen and Fran McDormand did Macbeth, and I think that will probably garner some nominations.
Oh,
and
nice.
I can't believe that I finally got an audition for one of these heralded projects. And I've got 2 short scenes with Mr. Denzel Washington, who I loved. He's a really vibrant, energetic, kind human being. And I know that when people get asked what it's like to work with so-and-so,
I
hate that question also. But Denzel deserves the accolades he gets. Completely dedicated, completely there. That was marvelous.
That's great. When's that come out? Are they holding it off for a little while, or?
Yeah, that's the second question I hate the most is when's that movie you did coming out? No, right now nobody knows when movies are coming out.
I know.
Nobody had any idea. In July, we were the only production that came back at Warner Brothers after everything was shut down. And that was fascinating and creepy at the same time. Because we were literally the only production on the lot. And normally, they don't even let you drive your car on the lot. Suddenly, I get a drive on. I get to park right next to where we're working. But all the rest of the streets it was a ghost town. And the soundstage where they shot Everybody Loves Raymond was a COVID testing facility.
Oh, man.
Yeah. Yeah, it was, different. That was the most unusual, lot that I've ever walked onto.
So, Brian, what was one of those first movies that you remember, or the shows? Was it like Hardcastle, McCormick, and I know Terminator? They all came out in 84. Do you remember what your first one was?
I do remember the first one. Before I forget this story, I do want to mention Hardcastle, McCormick.
Yeah.
Because that was, talking about being in the right place at the right time. My agent had got me a general interview for the casting director for Hardcastle and McCormick. And I still remember this audition. It wasn't an audition, it was just a general interview. And the lobby was filled with beautiful girls, like in their young 20s. I mean, like there was like 10 of them. And they were going in, they were coming out there, and I'm just sitting there waiting for my general. And so, Reuben Cannon. So finally, Reuben Cannon calls me in, and we're talking, we're chatting, just BS. And it was a general interview about where'd you come from, where's school, what do you like? And his assistant says, you got to take this, Reuben, you got to take this phone call. And Reuben's on the phone. What page? And he's flipping through the pages of the script. Page 19. That cop. It was the costume department calling, wanting to know who was cast to play this cop that arrests Brian Keith. And Reuben had missed it because it was only on one page in the script. So he puts his hand over the phone receiver, says, Brian, could you play a policeman on our show tomorrow? And I said, I knew I was in school at the time. I'm like, I'm going to be skipping some classes. Yeah, no problem. He goes, and so right there, he's like, yeah, I've got his sizes right here. What are his 6'2"? So he gives the customer my sizes right there. I left there with a job. That's the only time in my life that's happened, but talk about being in the right place at the right time. And on the way to work the next day, I pulled in to get gas at a 7-Eleven, and the TV guide was next to the cash register, and it had Brian Keith's picture on the front of the TV guide for Hardcastle and McCormick. And I bought it, and he autographed it for me, and I still have that.
That's cool.
Yeah. Very first job was Street Hawk. Street Hawk was basically Nighthawk with a motorcycle.
Okay.
It's exactly what the show was. That was the premise of the show. And God, anyway, there was only one line for the part. What's that? And I go in and I meet the two producers. It's like two punk rockers rob a liquor store, and they get hit with this blue particle beam from the Nighthawk motorcycle. And my character says, what's that? And so I met the two producers, and they said, well, Brian, can you go ahead and do the line for us? And the line didn't have a cue, and I wasn't being smart, but I said, well, can you do the blue particle beam? And he goes, okay. And he grabs his two hands and he kind of points them at me like he's going to catch the pointy end of a football. And he swings it right in front of me. And I go, what's that? That's how I got my SAG card. That's how they Taft-Hartley'd me, and that's how Brian got his SAG card. Saying, what's that? And another rude story about that, this director was a guy named Virgil Vogel. And the other punk rocker was a little confused about the shot. I was too. I mean, but he was the one that spoke up. And he was trying to get this question, and he was very politely asking the director a question. And this director, Virgil Vogel, blows up at him and said, you just blew your close-up, and walked away from the car. And he hadn't said anything unkind. He was just trying to understand what was going on. And this director, and he and I are sitting in the car just like, what? So in the final show, there was no close-up of us. You don't know, you didn't even know who was in the car.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
What a dick. Like a moment like that for two young actors, and that's terrible.
And he was just, and the other actor was a very humble, kind of soft-spoken, kind. I don't know why he just blew up.
Did it take a while for you to get used to? Obviously, being on stage is different than being in front of a camera. What was the adjustment like knowing that was what you're going to do now?
We had television acting class as part of our training program.
Oh, nice.
They had a little TV studio in the Fine Arts Complex. And I felt that the work that I did in the TV acting class, I don't want to sound conceited, but I felt that it had an honesty to it that wasn't present in most of the other actors in the class, because there was an attenuation problem where they were from stage and where you do need to be bigger and louder. And I saw immediately how the microphone and the camera lens amplified what you were doing. It's very intimate. You don't, all this projection doesn't need to take place. It's just, really getting to talk. And so, yeah, the attenuation wasn't something that I think maybe, so that I recognize that you don't want to amplify something. There's no amplification needed for that medium. And and especially, in some of the first jobs I was on, how soft some of these actors, you can barely hear them say their lines. They're talking so softly, because it sounds, when you're talking like that, it sounds very intimate. And they just, their voice, it rattles a lot more when you're talking like that. And then the very first feature film that I was in I was in school, and I went to it was a tiny room with a picnic table in it. The room was no bigger than 10 by 10. Might have even been smaller. And there was this producer and director, and they both had perms. They had curled perm hair. And one said her name was Gail Ann Hurd, and the guy said his name was Jim Cameron, and they were making a movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger. I remember I did the lines for Jim Cameron, and he looked at me and he goes, I believe that. Thank you. And then I left. It was a really short interview, and that's how I ended up in the absolute best movie I've ever worked on.
Really?
By far. The Terminator. By far. The original Terminator is by far the most acclaimed and best movie I've ever worked on.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. And
I had yet to sit in a movie theater watching a film where I was completely, about 15 minutes in, you're just going, holy shit, this is good. I've had, this is good, but not that holy shit. This is, when you saw the Terminator, it was groundbreaking. That was, they set up, how many movies do you go see that set the bar? That doesn't happen every year. It takes several years sometimes for there to be a movie that sets the bar, and that one did.
Yeah, and it's cool. It's you and Bill Paxton, who has a deep relationship and friendship for years with Jim Cameron before that.
Yeah, so I didn't know that during filming. To me, Bill was just my buddy in the scene. But afterwards, I did Bill's music video for him that Jim Cameron directed. And so then I think I kind of caught up in later years that they had a great relationship from Roger Corman, which was quite a school of its own.
Yeah, they were like set builders. I watched this really cool thing when he sadly passed away, Bill Paxton. I watched all these cool interviews, and he told a story about how he got the job for Aliens, and Jim Cameron's like, hey, I want you to be in it, but you got a screen test. So he had to go all the way out to London and then take a cab out. And then Jim Cameron gave him a poster tube, and he's like, here it is. And he turned the camera on. He's like, pretend that's a gun, and there's aliens everywhere. So he made him jump around on this couch. So he had footage of him, but it's a really cool, touching story. And it's just their relationship is really cool. And seeing him early on in such a huge movie, next to you, and for his buddy directing, that's pretty neat.
Well, and those are the deepest, most rich relationships, the ones that when you were all young and getting started and you didn't know what was going to happen. The Conan show at Universal Studios was that for me, because I ended up doing that show at the tour for 3 years. There ended up being more than 5 casts. There ended up being like 7 and 8. And the administration at the time was super happy to have you leave from your full-time gig so that the understudies could come and stay fresh and be good for the show. So anytime you got a professional job, they were like, sure, Brian, we'll see you in 3 weeks, or Brian, we'll see you in a month. So
wow.
I did Cobra. Here I was, starring opposite the #1 film star in the world at the time. I was gone for 5 months, came back and hopped right back into my evil villain Taurus Mortar costume.
Wow.
One of the happiest moments of my life was I had been to 7 interviews culminating in a screen test for Cobra over the course of a month while working at Universal Studios. That second summer after school, and we all came off. It's a very athletic show, and you just come streaming off of the backstage into the dressing room, and the cast was waiting for me. And our makeup artist, Laurie Benson, was holding the phone. She said, Brian, your agent's on the phone. And you could hear a pin drop in the makeup room, which was very rare because it was a very boisterous, a bunch of clowns. I mean, it was just a raucous affair. And I picked up the phone. It was Cynthia, and she said, Brian, you got the job.
Wow.
And I looked at my castmates, friends. I got the job. They exploded. They gang tackled me. They beat me on the floor. The gal playing Red Sonja rubbed her breasts in my face, and just everybody dogpiling on you because it was such hope that I was the first one to get a really big job out of the cast, and we had been working together for over a year at that point. It was just group elation that I've never experienced that since, because when you get to announce good news like that in a group full of friends, just fresh, boom, like that, it was a great moment.
So why did they have to bring you back so many times? Was there how many people was it like? They had like 10 and then went down to 5 and then 3 or 2 or?
Well, it was a testing process where I was an unproven metal, did I have what it took to be in this movie with Stallone? And, the cast, the first interview is with the casting director. Then the second interview is with the casting director and the director. And then the third interview was with Stallone and the director. And the fourth interview was with Stallone and the director. And the fifth interview was with Stallone and the director. And they wanted to see different things. And one of the things that Stallone had said in one of those interviews was, Brian, you seem like a really nice person. I mean, are you mean enough to do a part like this? And I said, well, yes. Acting. It's what we're gonna do. And so then they did a screen test for the full film crew. It was a higher budget. That screen test had more of a budget than some of the movies I've worked on since. The 235 millimeter film cameras, Oscar nominated director of photography. It was a big production.
Do you remember what scene it was, or was it pages from the movie or something?
Yeah, it was that final climactic scene with you can't stop the new world.
Yeah. Wow. Did they film it in that area, or was it just on a soundstage with nothing?
It was a soundstage that they had put a few set pieces on.
Wow.
And lit it and did all the makeup. And to see, it's not, they still screen test people, with the makeup and the lights, and just see how it's going to look. Is this the look they want?
Was there something that you did to get it? Maybe not even just the Night Slasher, but any other roles throughout your career? Was there any deep diving you did, like research? Because obviously the Night Slasher is sort of based on the Night Stalker that was like a few years earlier, and you were in LA when that was happening, right?
Yes. And that certainly those headlines certainly shaped that character. They they didn't do much research when they wrote that part, and this is kind of funny. I've told this story before, but before we're starting shooting, I'm like, Sly, I'm a little confused about exactly what these guys are doing. I mean, I understand there's a new world order, but how are they, how'd they form? And he goes, well, Brian, basically, you're doing what Hitler did. I go, okay. Well, Hitler had a way to systematically separate the Jewish population from their funds. He used them a lot of that was his financing of the war effort. But in that scene where we attack the girl in the car, we just like indiscriminately, randomly choose her by chance, so we don't show that there's some systematic way or that she had done something wrong, or she's part of some group that we're fighting against. And that kind of froze them in their tracks, and nobody said anything. I said, well, what if we had like some files on these people? Like, we had showed that this, we don't have to really say what it is, but at least it showed where we picked her out for a particular reason. Maybe if we had some cards or something. And Stallone looks at Cosmatos and says, get him some 3x5 cards. You've now heard the entirety of my character discussion on the movie Cobra. That was the deep dive. But personally, I wrote out an entire page credo. I called it Badden's Credo, because Abaddon was the name of the character in the script that we shot, but it was never said. So in the end, they just called him the Night Slasher. But I wrote out this thing called Abaddon's Credo. It's probably in a box somewhere. That's cool. to what we were doing.
No, that movie, I love that movie, but there's like three things, if I could like talk to Stallone, that like a few, like when he's using the scissors to cut the pizza, and just the whole movie, there's so much food. Him and his partner, all they're doing is talking about food every time you see them.
Yes. Hey, maybe he was hungry.
Maybe he was, but the guy who's a legend, I can't think of his name, but the guy that played Sly's partner in the movie,
Rennie Santoni.
Yeah, he was Dirty Harry's partner, and I'm like, all right, well, this is like obviously a perfect guy to cast in that role, but he always has food in his mouth, the whole thing.
It looks good. Looks very natural when you're chewing, but it's hard to act with food in your mouth. I mean, you watch the number of actors sitting at big dining scenes with banquet scenes. Watch how little of them are eating, because you can get busted so quickly because you have to match. You have to, when they come in, 2 hours later and turn the cameras around, you got to remember when you swallowed, when you put the food in your mouth, and it's ridiculously difficult to do that.
Me and my wife love catching that in shows. We're like, oh no, hey, her glass is just full. And it happens so much. And that's like, now when you directed, we'll go a little bit forward. When you directed and produced and wrote Extendables, is that something that you were mindful of doing that, or did that even come up?
Oh, matching while you're shooting? Well, what we did is we had multiple cameras.
Oh, nice. So
that you can shoot, two sides at once, which is one of the great things of the digital age, is that having several cameras and to shoot the scene with it saves you money, because you can shoot, two sides at once. And so when they want to cut from one side of the scene or to the other actor, you can do it in the same scene. You're not cutting from one take to take two. You might do that, but it just makes it so much easier. And it's freedom when you know that they're shooting both sides at once and you don't have to worry about matching. You can, especially if you're dealing with props or walking across the room, that, when the director says, we're playing this in a oneer, it's like, thank God. It's like, yes, please. We don't have to worry about matching. And I got I think think the director on Moonlighting was playing with me because I was in the pilot of Moonlighting when nobody knew who Bruce Willis was.
Yeah.
And he goes, and when we had Bruce Willis and Sybil Shepherd tied up to the chair, the director walked up to me and he goes, well, Brian, to intimidate him, well, your boss is talking here. I want you to take off, I want you to take off your rings. I want you to take off your watch. I want you to take your jacket off and take off your jewelry to know that he's going to be getting your meat hooks. And so I do that during the scene. I take everything off. And this gal walks up to me and says, okay, when Bruce said, no, I didn't, you took off the ring. When Sybil said this, you took off the watch. And I didn't have any idea what she was talking about. What? And I said, what? Okay. I mean, I just thought she was, I had no idea why she was telling me these things. And then, oh shit, I've got to do this the exact same way or it's not going to come together. Oh, matching. Nobody we had a year of television acting at Irvine and no one said anything to me about matching. You got to match. And now with multiple cameras, having the match it's a good idea, but a lot of times you don't have to.
That's great. So throughout your career, was there a role, just because you have so much on your IMDb and I don't want to take all of your night, is there a role that you loved to play the most, you had the most fun playing?
Absolutely. Without a doubt, Sheriff Cody in Key West.
Yeah?
Well, think about the headspace that you have to put yourself in when you're playing antagonistic characters. Especially, I mean, I was haunted by the night slasher. I mean, literally nightmares and just when that was over, I just tried to, rear view mirror that as quickly as possible. Because think about what you're doing when you are terrorizing an actress in a movie like that. Okay, you're doing everything that the real person who does that does. You've got the blood on your hands. This girl is screaming like you're the devil incarnate, like you are she's looking you in the eyes like you're trying to kill her. There's no way that you escape that emotion.
Yeah.
You are getting hit with this person's terror. And it's awful. It's really awful. Like I don't play those parts because I don't need to. There's too much emotional cost. I would if it was a script that had a lot of meat in it. If it was Silence of the Lambs, yeah, I'm in. I'm there. But Sheriff Cody, his headspace, he literally believed that he had no adversaries. There was just people that were a little off center. So he taught his prisoners Tai Chi on the beach, and he fed him broccoli juice out of his own pocket. He was a guy who literally just was looking out to see who he could help. And the show also was a comedy. So you're going for laughs. I mean, when you get to go for laughs, you have a peaceful heart and a peaceful headspace, and you're not having to terrorize anybody. It was such a beautiful character. Hats off to David Beard who directed and wrote that show and gave me that job. David, I love you. I still love Sheriff Cody. And Sheriff Cody was my email address for a long time.
Really?
Back before AOL died. Yeah. That was my email address. Yeah, Sheriff Cody.
So one of my favorite movies, obviously I love Cobra, but because we talk a lot of movie sequels, like that's the whole premise of what we do, because we want to be kind of different than the million other like podcasts and shows out there. But Fright Night 2 is one that honestly, it goes toe to toe with the original, and just the addition, of you, John Grease, Julie Carmen is to take over the role of, what is done in that first movie by Chris Sarandon, it's truly amazing what she does in the movie. And I love just having, you three with her. And I don't know, it's just a fun movie.
And I was able to add to that movie, and Tommy Lee Wallace was really directed the ensemble part of our team. And I added the scientific names for the bugs.
Nice.
So that it made my character a connoisseur, not just a guy who wants to lick ants off the floor. But Zooteroptus optomopti, I can't remember what they were, but and then they would eat the bugs. So he had that he was a connoisseur versus just a guy who liked bugs. So, and Tommy let me do that. That was not in the script. I should be getting Ronnie credit for that, but I didn't. And yeah, I agree with you on that movie going toe to toe. It is definitely in the top 10 movies I've got to work on.
Yeah, and just working, Roddy McDowall. Like, I know the questions people hate is like, how is it working with somebody? But out of all the people you've worked with, like you mentioned, obviously coming up, Frances McDermott and Denzel and Stallone. But man, like a guy like Roddy McDowall, like his career is just what he did, and what he did in that role as Peter Vincent. It is like so perfect because he plays like the perfect wuss in the first one when he finds out like that vampires are actually real. And then the second movie, I don't know, there's something about him that I just love. It's so real.
Agreed. And, I would give him a list of superlatives also, because he is that humble person who's there for the work. And we all had such respect for him also, kind of more of a fatherly figure. Yeah, Roddy.
And the effects on those movies are great. The teams that worked on the first one and the second one, and your scene was really cool. Was that something that took like a while to shoot, like your end demise?
Yes, and that there's an interesting thing, something I don't know if any actors ever dealt with, but that appliance that had the bugs coming out of it. Hats off to the makeup department. They first glued a piece of latex to my stomach that was just an insulation layer, so that the bugs didn't actually have to touch my real skin. So they protected the actor. Thank you. And then. They loaded it with the bugs. Okay, that it was slit, but I had to stay bent over because that held the slits in the latex foam closed, so the bugs couldn't get out. So I had to kind of stay curled up. And then you got to wait for them to roll, right? Well, the bugs are in there alive, and they're not happy about being in there. And whatever the bugs did against that latex skin that was over my skin, it started my stomach muscles to spasm, to like twitch involuntarily at just triggering it. Like, I don't know if it was their electricity or just because I wasn't, contracting hard to stay bent over, but it was one of the oddest sensations I've ever felt, that my stomach muscles were just twitching with the bugs dancing on them. So yeah, it was a bit of an endurance event. And then as I leant back, that opened up the slits, and the bugs came running out. And that reminds me of the bug wrangler. You've got horse wranglers, you've got, animal wranglers. Well, when you have insects on a set, you have a bug wrangler. And I got to the set early one morning, and I think the guy slept in his car. I had a book. What kind of car does a bug wrangler drive?
Ooh, I know. Given that year, maybe like a Pinto, like a Ford Pinto.
A bug wrangler drives a bug.
Oh, yeah.
So in this old Volkswagen Bug with the seat reclined is the bug wrangler. Okay, he's very pale. The bug wranglers don't get a lot of sun. And he's sleeping in this. God, I wish I had a picture of this. But all around him are these little insect cages with live bugs in them, like right next to his head. And he's in there sleeping away, happy as a hibernating bear with all this bug full of bugs. Vivid bug memory. Haven't thought of that guy for a while.
Ah, that's great. And every so often, like with YouTube, you can now punch up like anything you want. It's at your fingertips. But that scene, it just looks like you guys are generally having fun in that bowling scene.
Yes. Yes. And funny that I rented that bowling alley for like my son's like 12th birthday. That exact bowling alley. It's in Montrose, California, and you can rent it. And rented it and had pizza delivered, and that's where my son's 12th birthday was.
Were you doing the double throws and banging them over your head?
No, I had to be disciplined. You know, parents have to bowl by example.
Yes, you do. So when did you start? When did martial art? Because you've done so many things, like the piano. Like you have a lot of passions, which is so. I love that about people when they're passionate and they, like you said, you would get a monologue, stuck in your head until you memorized it. So when did you start martial arts, like Hapkido? When did that start?
That started because of my son. My son had an interest in it, and I was taking him to martial arts classes, and I was still going to dance classes at the time. And, I was never going to get hired as a dancer, but I really liked the dance classes. I liked how you felt when it was over, just, full of endorphins and loose. And as I sat there and watched my son's martial arts classes, I'm like, well, I'm getting cast in some of these martial arts movies. Maybe I should start studying this too. So I started going to Master Hojin Song's Hapkido studio in North Hollywood. And 7 years later, I got a black belt, and wow. that coincided with my getting that job in Mortal Kombat, playing Shao Kahn. When I auditioned for that, they wanted to do some martial arts, and typically, like a dance audition, the choreographer will do the dance for you, and you get to mimic them. And that didn't happen at the audition. The guy's like, what do you do? He says, what can you do? Can you show me some martial arts? I said, well, spinning round kick, double roundhouse, turn around back fist. I just gave him a list of, Hapkido moves. And he's like, okay, do them in this order. And that was my audition. And I could not have survived that audition had I not had studied the martial arts.
Look at that. You owe your son for that, for him wanting to do karate, and then.
Yeah. And it made more sense. And then, after that, I went back to the dance classes, and the dance studio had closed. It was gone.
Oh no.
Joe Tremaine on Ventura Boulevard. They had moved to a new location, and then that location closed. That was I think they were sort of riding the flash dance, that whole era that sort of segued out. And they were gone. The dance studios were gone.
Yeah. No, the reason I was asking about the Hapkido, because, you're in Rage and Honor going against two, like martial art, B movie heavyweights. And I was lucky enough to talk to Richard Norton, but you're fighting Richard Norton, Cynthia Rothrock, and a few years later you're fighting Chuck Norris.
Yes. And I had the opportunity to fight Steven Seagal, but luckily, thank you, Rob Cohen, offered me a job on Dragonheart. And I was able to decline being in Under Siege 2.
Wow.
Yeah, I had been offered the Under Siege 2 job. One of the rare times in the last 30 years where I had more than one job offer at a time. That's rare.
Why, you wouldn't have wanted to go toe to toe with Seagal, or the stories about him?
Well, the stories about him were, I had some stuntmen friends that had been hurt by him, that he likes to hurt somebody on every movie, that he won't pull his punch, that he'll hurt you. So that was a little scary also.
Yeah, he did that on Well, I'm sure he did it on a lot of movies, but he did it on Under Siege, and that actor Troy Evans was in that movie, and he kind of went nuts on him about it. He's like, man, that guy's got a family. That guy, he needs this job. Why would you? And nobody would say anything, because then they could maybe get kind of blackballed if they complained about it. But it's a shame. That's a shame. But no, about relationship wise, Paxton, you didn't know at the time. You're like, hey, this is just my buddy in the scene. Paxton and Cameron, Richard Norton and Chuck Norris were best friends.
Oh, I was unaware of that.
Yeah, when I talked to him, he was over in Australia doing his what was he doing back then? Some form of karate. And Chuck would come over, and they met. They connected, and he said, "Hey, Richard, if you ever come to the States, you got to be in one of my movies." So he was a bodyguard for the Rolling Stones, and Linda Ronstadt, every time she would go to Australia, she said, "Hey, I really trust you. I want you to be my security guard on my North American tours." So she's like, "Hey, you know what? Come for a year. You can always go back." And he never went back. But then when he was there for a year, Chuck Norris called him, and he's like, "Hey, you got to be in this." And I forgot what movie he was in, but it's this epic fight scene. Richard Norton gets set on fire while they're fighting. But yeah, so there's so many relationships that I guess people just don't know about. But no, that's cool. And then I just noticed the timeline. It was within 2 years you were going against both of them.
Yes. And in that time period too, you talk about relationships that do happen. That summer that I did the Conan show, and I bailed on PCPA, I was still mailing out pictures and resumes to projects that sounded interesting. And one of the ads was a Dramalog ad for a short about Vietnam. And I was fascinated by Vietnam, and I'd read several books about it while I was in college. Dispatches by Michael Hare, and another book that was just called Vietnam, because I missed that. I missed that by just a couple of years, the draft. It was just, and the stories that those guys went through just ripped my guts out. And this Dramalog ad said that there was 2 Vietnam veterans that were doing a short about Vietnam. And I said, that sounds worthwhile. So they called me in, and it was Sheldon Lettich. And I ended up being in the short film, and he made a short called Firefight. Well, Sheldon went on to write, he's probably sold 20 scripts, but he wrote 4 or 5 of Van Damme's movies and directed probably that many. And so I ended up doing 2 Van Damme movies with Sheldon Lettich from this tiny, no-budget project that I did for Sheldon back in the summer of '83.
Wow. So that's your kind of set. I know you didn't go to Santa Marina, but that's the same time frame. You had that story. So did you keep a connection with him, or did you
with
just
Sheldon?
show up for the audition of with Sheldon?
I saw Sheldon yesterday.
No, you did. Okay. No, I'm talking about for when up until Lionheart. That was the first time that you worked with Van Damme?
Yeah, Lionheart was, but we stayed in touch. Yeah, we nice. I went to his kids' birthday parties. We were friends. He lived down kind of in the heart of Hollywood, so it was easy to swing by his place if I would after an audition. Yeah, Sheldon and I have always stayed in touch, and he's super well-read, bright. Written several scripts that have sold. And we're buddies.
That's cool. It's cool when relationships last, because especially in an industry like we were talking about, that only a small percentage of people make it. It's cool to see that still be there. So Brian, this has been great. 2 more questions. One I have to ask you about, because I think it's one of those roles now. Talking to you, you've played these menacing people that haunted your dreams, but playing a role like the comedic side, obviously on Key West you loved, but what about like playing like Joe Dirt, a part that is so memorable in that movie, playing Buffalo Bob?
I loved getting that part. David Spade always cracked me up. But you know, I should have had a blast doing that part. Okay, I should have been ecstatic, and circumstances just totally screwed me to enjoy that day of shooting. Totally screwed me. Okay, my ex-father-in-law had hired Ivana Trump's attorney to go after me because he wanted me to relinquish half custody of my children. He had ordered me to give my kids back to Isabel on a weekend when my ex-wife, when it was my weekend with the kids. And he told me if I didn't, that he'd have 3 pit bull attorneys on my ass. And he did. He hired these attorneys to try to undo our divorce.
Oh my God.
And the only day of shooting that I had, I think it was in June, was the day that custody battle got scheduled in downtown court in LA. But my call time was at like 2 p.m, and the court time starting at 8:30. Well, we get there at court, and these attorneys got $350 an hour. Well, we got set aside because of, I think it was something called ex parte, where something has to be seen. So we didn't even get to see the judge the whole morning. I didn't get to go to the court for the custody battle that afternoon. I had to go to work. So it's like the father's leaving. It's not important enough for him to be in court when it's about custody for his kids. I mean, that I'm like freaked out that I have to, otherwise I'm going to hang up this production company because I've already been established. We already shot the exterior scene another day. I can't hang up the same day. So and court's over with it at like 4:30. They never take the cases after 4:30. So I'm on set trying to be funny, and I'm on my cell phone trying to, after 4:30, trying to get a hold of the attorney to find out what happened in court. And 4:30 goes by, 5:30, 6:30. I'm like freaking out. He doesn't want to call me because something bad has happened. This is over custody of my kids. I should be enjoying David Spade down in the hole reading Auto Trader, and I'm just a nervous wreck. Finally, at 7:30, attorney decides to answer his cell phone and said, no, fine. No change, Brian. No, fine. Custody's the same. Well, why didn't you call me? Well, you said you were going to call me. Like the attorney doesn't think it's important enough to let a man know that his custody with his kids is going to be fine. And just, this is a little off track, but I found weeks later that he had gone out with the opposing counsel for drinks. Wow. And they were discussing how to join companies, and they joined firms. The opposing counsels, weeks after this court battle, joined firms and became one firm. And that was more important than spending 5 minutes telling me that I wasn't losing any custody with my children.
Yeah.
It was unimportant to him.
Oh my God.
So that was my day of shooting. When I should have been laughing with David Spade. At that point, for the rest of the day, I got to enjoy it and breathe a heavy sigh of relief. But it was just, it was the only day I even worked in that month of that year. It was just, what? Anyway.
And were able to at least get some of the rage out when you go from like, 0 to 60 yelling at him.
Yeah, it was there.
I think it's one of those things that is probably mentioned in so many different movies and books, but you never know, like when you're in something, that this is going to be like the best. I think it's in Sandlot that you never know this can be the last time you're going to get together and play baseball with your friends. And Those things like hit home with me. So when you're on a set, have you ever taken mementos? Were you ever like had that frame of mind, like, hey, I'm going to grab this, or keep scripts? Do you do that?
Yes, I've kept the script from every production that I've worked on. Some of them are signed. My last day on X-Files, David Duchovny and Jillian signed that script for me.
Nice.
And then sometimes you get offered significant things. I have a lot of wardrobe from the parts that I've played. They sometimes they'll give it to you. Sometimes you can buy it at half price. The mementos that I should have kept, but I didn't. But they offered me one of the replicas of the knife on Cobra, and I turned it down because I had cut myself so many times on it, and I had nightmares about it. I didn't want it in my house. And the funny thing is now I have several of those knives in my house because I autographed them and donated them to charity.
Oh, that's cool.
But at the time, the guy didn't want to see it. But I've got the ring that I wore in Mortal Kombat. I've got my sword, my titanium sword. That's probably the most valuable thing that I was ever given. Thank you, Rafaela de Laurentiis and Rob Cohen, for giving me my sword from Dragonheart. That hangs on the mantle of my fireplace.
Really? That's cool.
Yeah.
Man, Brian, this has been great. Thank you so much for taking the time.
My pleasure. Always good to reminisce. It's about how the chapter flipping through the chapter pages, looking back and then looking forward. And I hope your listeners if they don't have a penchant for the Bard, for Mr. William Shakespeare, that they develop one and go check out this latest version of Macbeth.
Yeah, I can't wait my wife's an English teacher, and sure she's stoked. She has so many old Shakespeare books that she's like a book collector. So we have a lot of old books on our in our bookshelf in our living room. So I'm excited to tell her about that movie.
I want to hear your review after you go see it.
I will.
And let's hope that it gets to be in a theater where people won't be afraid to sit next to each other.
Yes. All right, Brian, stay safe. And thanks again.
Okay. You bet. Have a good night.
Wasn't Brian great? The stories he had. I love going back, having the opportunity to edit these and just listen back and go over parts that make me laugh because I really loved his story about Fright Night Part 2. I love that movie and just the behind the scenes of his epic demise. If you haven't seen it, you got to watch the movie. Well, you have to watch anyway because that's the next movie that we're going to be covering. The movie's free on YouTube, like 3 different versions, and we get into why that it's available. But yeah, so many stories from his career. He was in the right place at the right time for an audition and became a cop on a TV show just because he was there. And then the rest is history. Thank you, Brian, if you're listening to this. And thank you for listening to this. And don't forget to review, rate, share our podcast. Follow us on all social media at Sequels Only. And don't forget to check out our website, sequelsonly.com. Good night.